These are 5 of SpongeBob's darkest fan theories. Theory 1. The nuclear testing theory. The first theory suggests that Bikini Bottom isn't just a whimsical underwater city. It's actually built on the site of nuclear devastation. This theory starts with a chilling real-world connection that makes everything about SpongeBob much more sinister. Bikini Bottom shares its name with Bikini Atoll, the real-world location where the United States conducted 23 nuclear weapons tests between 1946 and 1958. According to this theory, the characters we know and love aren't just talking sea creatures. They're the mutated survivors of nuclear radiation, forever changed by atomic testing. This is where the theory gets genuinely disturbing. Think about it. Why can sea creatures talk, walk upright, and build fires underwater? The theory suggests that the nuclear radiation didn't just affect their physical forms, but completely altered their DNA, creating these anthropomorphic beings. SpongeBob's square shape, Patrick's unusual pink coloration, and Squidward's ability to play instruments despite being an octopus all become evidence of genetic mutation. The most chilling part of this theory is what it implies about their world. Every cheerful moment, every innocent adventure, is actually taking place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where the characters are the mutated descendants of creatures that survived nuclear annihilation. Their childlike innocence becomes even more tragic when you realize they're living in the aftermath of humanity's most destructive weapons. This theory transforms the entire show from innocent entertainment into a commentary on nuclear warfare and environmental destruction. The bright colors and cheerful atmosphere become a facade hiding the dark reality of atomic testing's consequences. What makes this particularly unsettling is how it recontextualizes every episode as taking place in a world forever scarred by human violence. Theory 2. The 7 Deadly Sins. The next theory is the 7 Deadly Sins interpretation, and this one suggests that each main character represents a different moral failing that leads to spiritual damnation. According to this theory, the main characters of SpongeBob aren't just quirky personalities, they're deliberate representations of the 7 deadly sins from Christian theology. Each character embodies a specific sin that corrupts the human soul, and their interactions represent the constant battle between virtue and vice. This is where the theory gets psychologically disturbing. SpongeBob represents lust, not sexual lust, but an unhealthy obsession and desire for everything around him, especially his job and friends. Patrick embodies sloth, living a life of complete laziness and ignorance. Squidward is wrath, consumed by anger and resentment toward everyone around him. But the theory gets darker when you consider the other characters. Mr. Krabs represents greed, obsessed with money to the point of neglecting his daughter and exploiting his employees. Sandy is pride, believing herself superior to everyone else due to her intelligence and Texas origins. Plankton embodies envy, consumed by jealousy of Mr. Krabs' success. The most disturbing implication is that Gary represents gluttony, not just for food, but for attention and affection. This means that even SpongeBob's beloved pet is corrupted by sin. According to this interpretation, Bikini Bottom isn't a fun underwater city. It's actually a representation of hell, where these sinful souls are trapped for eternity, doomed to repeat their moral failures forever. This theory reframes every episode as a morality play about spiritual corruption and damnation. The character's inability to grow or change becomes evidence that they're trapped in an eternal punishment, forever acting out their sins without hope of redemption. What makes this particularly dark is how it suggests that children watching the show are actually being entertained by representations of humanity's worst moral failures. Theory 3. The mental institution theory. The third theory is the mental institution interpretation, and this one suggests that the entire show takes place inside the mind of someone suffering from severe psychological disorders. According to this theory, SpongeBob SquarePants isn't actually happening in an underwater world. It's all taking place in the imagination of a patient in a mental health facility. The characters represent different aspects of a fractured psyche, and each episode is actually a therapy session or psychological episode. This is where the theory becomes genuinely disturbing from a mental health perspective. SpongeBob represents the patient's inner child, innocent, optimistic, but completely disconnected from reality. Patrick embodies the patient's cognitive impairment or intellectual disability. Squidward represents depression and suicidal ideation. But the theory gets darker when you consider what the other characters represent. Mr. Krabs symbolizes the patient's relationship with authority figures and capitalism, possibly representing an abusive employer or father figure who only cared about money. Sandy represents the patient's desire to be intelligent and capable, but also their feeling of being an outsider who doesn't belong. The most chilling aspect is that Plankton represents the patient's self-destructive tendencies and paranoid thoughts. Every scheme Plankton hatches represents the patient's intrusive thoughts and self-sabotaging behaviors. The fact that Plankton never succeeds suggests that the patient is aware these thoughts are harmful but can't stop having them. According to this interpretation, every episode represents a different therapy session where the patient works through their trauma, mental illness, and psychological issues. The repetitive nature of the show, characters never really changing or growing, represents the cyclical nature of mental illness, where patients often repeat the same patterns without making real progress. Theory 4. The Purgatory Theory. The The fourth theory is the purgatory interpretation, and this one suggests that all the characters are actually dead and trapped in a spiritual limbo. According to this theory, Bikini Bottom isn't a living underwater city. It's actually purgatory, the spiritual realm where souls go to work off their sins before moving on to the afterlife. Each character died in the human world and is now trapped in this underwater limbo, forced to repeat the same patterns until they achieve spiritual purification. This is where the theory gets genuinely morbid. Spongebob died as a child, which explains his eternal innocence and childlike wonder. He never got to grow up and experience the corruption of adulthood. Patrick died from a drug overdose or accident, explaining his brain damage and lack of awareness about his situation. But the theory becomes darker when you consider how the other characters died. Squidward committed suicide, which is why he's perpetually miserable and can never find happiness. Mr. Krabs died of a heart attack brought on by his greed and stress over money, and now he's forced to continue his obsession with wealth as punishment. The most disturbing implication is that Sandy died in a diving accident, drowning while trying to prove she could survive underwater. Her air helmet and dome represent her desperate attempt to maintain the illusion that she's still alive and breathing. Plankton died of loneliness and isolation, which is why he's forever trying to steal the formula. He's desperately seeking the connection and success that eluded him in life. According to this interpretation, the characters are trapped in an endless cycle where they can never truly achieve their goals or find peace. SpongeBob will never become the perfect employee. Squidward will never find happiness. Mr. Krabs will never have enough money, and Plankton will never succeed in his schemes. They're doomed to repeat these patterns for eternity as punishment for their earthly sins. Theory 5. The capitalist exploitation theory. Although the purgatory theory takes the cake for spiritual horror, the darkest theory is the capitalist exploitation interpretation. This one exposes the show as a disturbing commentary on worker abuse, economic inequality, and systemic oppression. According to this theory, SpongeBob SquarePants isn't a lighthearted cartoon. It's actually a scathing critique of capitalism and worker exploitation disguised as children's entertainment. Every character represents a different class in the economic system, and their interactions demonstrate how the wealthy exploit the working class. This is where the theory reveals the show's true darkness. SpongeBob represents the exploited worker, enthusiastic, hardworking, and completely brainwashed into believing that his exploitation is actually a privilege. He works for poverty wages, has no benefits, and is so indoctrinated that he pays Mr. Krabs for the privilege of working. But the theory gets more disturbing when you analyze the power dynamics. Mr. Krabs represents the capitalist class. He owns the means of production, exploits his workers, and cares only about profit. He pays SpongeBob and Squidward starvation wages while making enormous profits from their labor. Squidward represents the class-conscious worker who recognizes his exploitation, but feels powerless to change it. The most messed up aspect is how the show normalizes this exploitation for children. SpongeBob's enthusiasm for being underpaid and overworked is presented as admirable, teaching kids that they should be grateful for any job, no matter how exploitative. The show essentially functions as capitalist propaganda, conditioning children to accept worker abuse as normal. Plankton represents small business owners who are crushed by larger corporations. He's not evil, he's desperate. His attempts to steal the Krabby Patty formula represent how small businesses are forced into unethical behavior to compete with corporate giants. Sandy represents the educated class who could help, but chooses to remain isolated in her own privilege. The theory suggests that Bikini Bottom's economic system is deliberately designed to keep workers poor and desperate. SpongeBob lives in a pineapple because he can't afford real housing. Squidward lives between SpongeBob and Patrick, representing how the working class is trapped between the brainwashed workers and the lumpen proletariat. This theory had multiple dark implications, but the most prominent being the normalization of economic exploitation and worker abuse. The fact that SpongeBob's enthusiasm for being underpaid is presented as positive teaches children to accept exploitation as normal. What's worse is how the show presents Mr. Krabs' greed and worker abuse as comedic, rather than the serious social problem it represents. The theory suggests that millions of children are being conditioned to accept capitalist exploitation through what appears to be innocent entertainment, making this potentially the most insidious and harmful interpretation of all. Whether these theories are true or not, they certainly make you look at Bikini Bottom in a completely different light. If you want to see more videos like this, take a look at this video right here.